Evening, everyone. Please be seated. Sorry for running a little bit behind this evening. Ran into some traffic on the way back from San Angelo, but we're going to move forward anyway here with our lesson as we continue in the respect manual here. This is unit 4 here of the intermediate series, respect. And hopefully you were able to join us last time as we continued or began the process of going through the information that is presented here in the unit. Kind of rehashing some of the information that we've gone over in the previous units as you begin how to use this program, the introduction, the preface, the table of contents, which was gone over by David, and of course William in the previous classes, and what Chris left off with in the self-control unit in the class several classes back. And so here we are in unit 4 of respect. And in this first unit, as was covered before, we're going to be talking about the value of respect. But what we're laying the foundation for here is what is going to be expected of the teacher, right? As we went into the introduction, we covered a few points last week as we looked at some of the things in regards to how disrespect has become so commonplace in our society. It's come to a point where, it is what's considered the new normal, right? Kind of like when the COVID-19 hit the scene and people got used to getting not takeout, but stuff delivered to their houses and things delivered to their cars when they go to stores, and 24-hour stores not being 24-hour stores anymore. They're closing at 11 or 12 o'clock at night, and people were saying well, this is the new normal. Well, it seems like in society today, because of the lack of morality, or because of the lack of education in positive morality, in teaching people to value following the rules, and how when they follow the rules, that increases their self-worth, right? And that's going to be the second thing we talk about when as we move through this unit. We're going to learn about what respect is, and then we're going to see how it applies to us as individuals, right? As the saying goes, and we mentioned in previous classes, I mentioned it last class, how different societies, different cultures, and so forth, many people kind of know what they call the golden rule, right? Treat others as you want to be treated. Well, in order to treat somebody the way you want to be treated, or the way you should be treated, well, you have to lay the foundation to know how you should treat yourself, okay? You should understand that you are an important member of society. And as we're going to learn as we move forward here, respect is not something that needs to be earned, but it's something that everybody deserves. Even if a person doesn't think they deserve respect, they deserve respect. Now, as teachers of the peaceful solution, we might be the only or the first persons to actually not only instill that through our teachings to our students that we interact with on a daily basis, but demonstrate it through our practices. Remember, this is something that needs to be applied. As we went through the introduction here, we let's back up here. We're going to look at page lesson plan 1A. That's where we're picking up today from where we left off last class. But if you look at that that first paragraph, that's where we saw that word applied there. The Peaceful Solution Character Education Program is designed to teach a person how to develop a positive character. And then it says, when applied. So as mentioned before in the previous classes, actually I was just listening to one of David's classes on the way up here, and he mentioned again how knowledge is power. And that's kind of a globally accepted phrase, right? Knowledge is power. And we also mentioned it in the Peaceful Solution as well. But that knowledge does not benefit you or anyone else until it's applied, right? Having all this storehouse of knowledge, I knew people who they They knew the rules. They were excellent. They had great memories. They can quote to you, something that they might have only read one time, right? But they didn't have the self-control and the discipline to put those things into practice. They were really book smart, but they weren't wise in their application of those smarts. Okay, so this is something that we have to also kind of remind our students continuously when they go through these classes. They have to remember that it's not enough for you to just listen and take notes. Those are very beneficial things. Those are necessary things to aid you in the retention of the information. But when you put something you've learned into practice, you actually have I think it's somewhere upwards of 80 to 90 something % more opportunity of remembering it than just hearing it or reading it, okay, or even seeing it demonstrated. Seeing it demonstrated is like a greater percentage of being able to remember it or retain that information. But when you actually put it into practice, you remember it even more, right? Kind of like somebody giving you directions. Take the such and such road down here, and you go about a quarter mile, and then you make a right, and then you go about 3 houses down, you make another left, and then you see a big boulder on the right-hand side. Don't go there, make a left on the other side, right? Well, you got to kind of, I don't know why it is when we're trying to find some place and we're trying to find the direction someplace, we got to turn the radio down, as if we'll hear the address scream out to us a little bit louder. That gives us like maybe a ability to concentrate a little bit more. But then when you drive that route, the very next time you go there, you don't even have to look at directions, right? Because now you've applied those instructions that someone's given you, and you can just bring it back up and you can remember it very easily. Well, the more our students apply the lessons that they've learned in the Peaceful Solution, the easier they're going to be able to recall the information that was taught to them. And that's why there's also included the enrichment activities, and so forth, crossword puzzles and skits and things of that nature, because it helps young people, it helps us, older people as well, remember the information. So when applied, this program can improve every aspect of life. And that's the goal. As it's on the very front of the book there, to change the hearts and minds, right? To change the hearts and minds towards something that's positive and away from the negativity, because we know, as we learned in the character unit, chapter 2, character and its effects in the family, all in the family, we learned that, everybody has a combination of positive and negative character. Families have a combination of healthy and dysfunctionality that takes place in that family. Well, we want to, as we've learned, accentuate the positive and eliminate the negative, right? Not focus on the negative. We already know the negative is there. It's gonna do what the negative part does. Well, we don't want to accentuate that. We want to acknowledge that it is. We want to be able to tell what it is so we can be able to distinguish between the two, place them in the category, get rid of the bad stuff, and focus on building the great stuff, the positive stuff, the positive principles that will help us to develop a trustworthy, respectful character. And so we saw here in the second paragraph, we also covered, we live in a world where disrespect has become commonplace, and people sometimes value their possessions more than the life of a fellow human being. And I read a few articles. There were a few more that I had, and I had some more articles for this class, and I didn't get to. I actually left them in my truck on the way up here. Those articles gave examples of people who placed greater value on their possessions than they did on the life of another human being. Somebody's car got scratched, somebody got their shoes stepped on. One man actually lost his life as a result of someone else not practicing self-control, right? Someone else not discerning or categorizing positive values from negative values, right? There's nothing wrong with valuing the maintenance and the appearance of your vehicle, but those values should not be above the value of a human life, okay? And as was mentioned in the previous class, obviously that was an unintentional form of disrespect that was shown when the man was going down the alley. The driver could have simply pulled up behind him and just made him aware, when you pass me in the alley, I think your mirror accidentally scratched my vehicle. And it probably could have been handled in a respectful way, without anybody being injured, or in that case, their life being lost. And well, those men are at that point, convicted of a crime, a senseless crime. Well, all crime is senseless, and in prison. And then the other one where the guy was hit on the back of the head because he just accidentally stepped on another guy's shoe. Okay, and I even saw conflicts and fights break out like that in high school for what we would call as adults just absolutely petty things, right? Petty things. People get offended by just the slightest thing, the way you look at them, the way you said something to them, you brushed up against them, or you stepped back because somebody in front of you stepped back and you stepped on their shoe, or you pushed them back and now they want to have a bug out match with you. Well, I mean, the reason being is because those are a part of the things that they've been taught and they have learned to value throughout their life. They don't have value for themselves first and foremost. They don't have respect or self-respect. Otherwise, they wouldn't conduct themselves in a way that would actually make them look like a menace to society, okay, instead of a positive contributing member to society. And then we saw here how we witness this behavior in forms of violent acts and vulgar language on television, at the movies, in video games, and in songs. And some of those things, we covered in regards to influences and how they are displayed on a daily basis. In fact, let me see here. Yeah, let's move down to that last paragraph. It says, without appropriate role modeling, and I reminded you to, circle or underline, highlight, or just take note of that role modeling, because it plays a twofold part in this introduction of what we're talking about here. We see that on the outside, it is very important that our students receive positive role modeling. And then we're going to see why in a little bit here. So without appropriate role modeling of what respect is, in other words, it's not enough just to tell them you need to show respect, right? You need to have respect for yourself. You need to show respect to your brother or your sister. Don't do that. Show respect to your mother or your teacher. And then that's it. You leave the child or the student guessing, well, okay, you told me I need to do that. Okay, how do I do it? Well, without the peaceful solution, it's kind of hard to give them that instruction, right? They need to have guidance. Telling them what they should or should not do is one thing. But as teachers, it's up to us to properly guide them. So now they have an answer to the problem. Like was mentioned in the previous class in the student's manual. The student's manual actually has the answers in the back of the book, right? We're not trying to make this one of those nobody gets an A in my class type things, right? That just shows how poor a teacher is if he can't even guide his students to the point where they can get an A in their class. I think it would be a sign of great educational skills for your students to all get A's, right? I mean, and I'm not just saying just give everybody an A so you can look great, but they actually earn it because you're that great of a teacher. Well, that's how we need to be with the peaceful solution. And the peaceful solution lays it out clearly. All we have to do is relay it to the students in a way, make it enjoyable and so forth as it's presented, and they will get it and they will start to put it into practice. So without appropriate role modeling, so we have to actually show what respect is and how it should be applied to every interaction. Our youth then practice this respect displayed in entertainment and other aspects of their daily lives. The results are homes where parents no longer have authority, and schools where there is a disruption in learning because of teasing, bullying, and physical or verbal assaults. And we pointed out last class how that does not mean that that the parents don't have authority. It simply means that the students don't recognize the authority of the parents, okay? And so as a result, they don't pay attention to any of the instructions, they don't yield to any of the correction, and they continue to just do whatever they want to. All fun and games until someone is sitting in the jail or a detention home or something like that, okay? Well, we're trying to prevent that. As educators, we have the responsibility to teach our students that disrespect is harmful and can result in many negative consequences, all right? So, we talked about the the things that are displayed in entertainment and other aspects of life. And for your notes, you can put really page 122 to 128 from the self-control unit, because in there we talk about the influences that we have to be mindful of. And this is a great opportunity to remind your students. You remember what we covered in self-control, right? And that was what was covered in chapter 5. Remember what we covered in self-control unit on the influences and the power of influences. We covered that also in the acceptance unit. We talked about media, right? Television and movies and so forth. Music, more than just the great beat. Video games, right? All these are very powerful influences that affect the things that people value. And as we covered in the character unit, anything that has the ability to affect what you value, it has the ability to affect your character, right? And your character is responsible for the decisions that you make, for influencing the decisions that you make, how you behave, how you conduct yourself on an everyday basis. So we have that responsibility to teach our students that disrespect is harmful, excuse me, harmful, and can result in many negative consequences. And so look at the bottom here. It says some issues presented in this unit are all life deserves respect. Okay, all life deserves respect, and that's a great opportunity to jump back to chapter 1 of the character unit, and on page 8, because we see the three basic categories of morality, right? And the very, very first one there is behavior and attitude towards all life. Now, probably didn't even know that we were building up to this point here with that simple statement on page 8 of the character unit, and showing that when we have a positive attitude, when we behave positively towards all life, we're actually also showing respect towards all life. In the same token, when we show respect towards all life, it's going to reflect in what? Our behavior and our attitude, okay? And this drops us down into one of these three basic categories of morality. In that first paragraph there on page 8, it says a moral value is a line that divides wrong behavior from right behavior. So when you look at the statement of all life deserves respect, right, and you take into consideration your interactions with life, whether it's a person, an animal, whatever the case might be, you have to take into consideration, I guess you have to look at a line that's drawn in your behavior, right? Or two categories that you might want to put that choice, that decision, or that thing you're considering doing, you have to put it into a category. Is this something that's going to bring harm to myself, that other person, that other animal, whatever the case might be? Is it going to bring harm to them? Well, that goes in the category of negative. That goes in the category of no. Don't do those things. Those things are immoral. If this is something that will bring a benefit to them, that won't bring harm to them, that won't bring harm to myself, then that's something that falls into a positive category. Now, just because it falls into a positive category does not always mean that we should just go out and do it, right? There are a lot of things that are considered positive, but you can't just go and do, because something else you need, as we covered in the very beginning here, is you need permission, right? You have to ask permission. And when you ask permission of the owner, in the case of something that belongs to someone, going up and just, people like to go and pet someone's dog when they're walking out on the street or at a dog park or something like that. It would be wise to ask the owner if you can have permission to pet the dog, right? Or I don't think people walk their cats or anything, do they? Okay, right? Because the dog might not like to be pet. The owner might not want the dog being petted. Maybe possibly the owner's training the dog for a particular reason, and they don't want just people walking up and doing certain things. Remember, the owner has rights regarding their belonging. And when you ask the owner, so these are two things. When you ask the owner, you're showing respect. When you accept the owner's answer and abide by that, you're also showing respect, okay? So it's not enough just to ask them and then wait till they turn their head and, hey, poochie, 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 right? And what they don't know won't hurt them, right? Because you also have to accept the answer. Don't argue with them. Don't try to convince them to change their mind, because that is disrespectful. And we talked about that also in the acceptance unit, in dealing with friends and being careful of how you choose your friends and what a positive friend would do and they wouldn't do, right? They should never encourage you to do something that could affect your character in a negative way, or that could bring harm to you, or that could hurt your reputation. They should also accept your answer. No is okay. Say no and mean it. You don't have to give an explanation. And a true friend, will accept that, and they'll show their respect by accepting that answer. We also are going to see how self-respect is gained by recognizing one's worth. Okay? Not so much, or primarily, I guess I should say, by just going out and doing a whole bunch of things. Making it your goal. I'm going to go out and I'm going to carry 5 grandma's grocery bags to their car from the grocery store so I can gain respect. Right? No, the very first thing you have to do is recognize your worth. Recognize one's worth, because we're talking about self-respect here. And it's very important, like I've mentioned, how can you have respect for others if you don't know how to respect yourself? Kind of like in the when men and women are going through the police academy, a lot of times some of the weaponry that they'll have them use on people, particularly the taser. I've seen this before, the taser, they'll actually, as part of their training, they'll have to get tased so they'll know how it feels, and they won't hopefully be so quick just to pull that thing out and use it on somebody else, right? Sometimes they have to go through being in a room with tear gas so that they know how that feels, okay? But these are just some of the things. Now, those things aren't showing respect, but I mean, I'm just showing you the example I'm giving you is saying that they're needing to see what the person that they would be doing that to would experience, right? Because some people are just quick to pull out a weapon and try to disable somebody, when there's other ways where a situation can be de-escalated, okay? And, part of that is to kind of eliminate those, what they call trigger happy people, and get, police officers were, I don't know, a long time ago, they were actually called peace officers. Their part of their job was to bring peace to the neighborhood, right? Not go and just shoot people because they were resisting arrest or running away from them, right? They were actually supposed to be a part of their motto. It used to be a long time ago, at least in where I grew up, it was to serve and protect. To serve and protect, right? And a lot of it just had to do with community interactions, just being around and letting people know that they were there, and having a great reputation with the children of the neighborhood. Not somebody that when people saw them, everybody did like roaches when the light turned on and scattered, right? No, I mean, they were kind of an integral part of the community, and they kind of had that honor. Well, they've kind of gotten the bad reputation over the years, but that's usually a result of a few making some really bad choices in how they carry out their responsibilities. In a lot of cases, it's the abuse of power that they have. And that's how one person, or just, a couple, 2 or 3 or 4 people, can actually sully the reputation of an entire society, right? Of police or law enforcement agencies. So learning self-respect, that's what they're going to be learning in this unit as well, and how it is gained by recognizing one's worth and one's potential to contribute to society. Because I've heard people say, what can I do, right? I'm just a 12-year-old boy, or a 15-year-old boy, or whatever the case might be. No one's going to listen to me. That's not true. As a person who works on building themselves, building their character, that's going to be one of the greatest resources that they could obtain. The knowledge on how to build and maintain a positive character, and to show that through their attitude and their actions in everything that they do, as long as they remember what they've learned in their character development and apply that to every aspect of their life, they're going to be very successful in their influence to others, in their ability to teach and guide others, in just something as simple as how to have respect for themselves and to show it towards others, whether they're their peers or those in authority. We're also going to learn appropriate ways to respond to disrespect. That's a pretty great chapter there. That's going to be in chapter 5. And the importance of treating the environment with respect as we get to the last chapter there. So, keep all these things in mind as we move forward. And these are the core points of what we're going to be looking at in this book here, this unit. And look at the last chapter or last paragraph there on page LP1A. It says, when the concept of respect is fully explored, students will have the tools necessary to practice respect for themselves, others, and the environment, thereby improving their quality of life and the lives of those with whom they interact. They will also learn that by practicing self-control, they will better be able to cope with those who show disrespect. You see that? So you see why it's important when we talk about not skipping any of the material, when we talk about, making sure you're covering it as it is presented. Here we are talking about practicing self-control. How is your student going to know what self-control is? How are you as a teacher going to know what self-control is if you just jump right into the respect unit because I feel like teaching respect today. I feel like today could be a respectful day, right? And you haven't gone over any of the preliminary information to understand that you have to even have respect or self-control to even practice respect. It requires a lot of self-control, especially when you are being verbally abused. All right, somebody who does not have respect for themselves, who is not demonstrating self-control. You see this a lot in people who deal in customer service. People who have to deal with the public on a daily basis. And when we went down to Argentina, I think Chris mentioned it before, we dealt with one of the major corporations down there who part of their job is dealing with customers. That was the biggest thing that they were having frustrations with. People are just extremely disrespectful. Now imagine, going into your 8 to 4 or 9 to 5 job, knowing that's a part of your job, you're going to be disrespected. Maybe not 8 hours a day, maybe not 4 hours a day, but at some point throughout the day and possibly several times throughout the day during your work, you're going to be disrespected, right? That stuff kind of weighs heavy down on a person, okay? But knowing how to control yourself in those situations, knowing how to respond, and kind of taking into consideration that people usually are that way because they lack knowledge, right? They're frustrated about things, but sometimes they just need to be educated, right? I've even had that situation in myself. I get frustrated because something is not working like I think it should be. Turns out, well, all I had to do was be told or instructed or read a little bit more of the instructions to find out, oh, I've got to do this, and then it'll work. Sometimes it's just a matter of them being educated. And a person who understands that is going to take the time. They're going to have patience. They're going to practice self-control. And through the demonstration of respect, not responding with disrespect, they're going to be able to help that person. Possibly they're not going to be able to help that person. Some people, it seems like you just can't help. See, you can help anybody, but they just will not allow themselves to hear, and to accept the help. They won't be satisfied with anything you say because they want it their way. And if it's not their way, then they don't want to have any of it. Okay. But maintaining your self-control, right? And having respect for yourself and how you engage or interact with that person, at least at the very end of that conversation, you have the peace of mind to know that you didn't add to it, right? You practice the peaceful solution. So let's look at the next paragraph there. It says, an excellent way to begin the unit is by reviewing the list of negative and positive character traits found on page 203 and 208. And of course, you would go through that, of course, after the note to the teacher there. because this is for the teacher here. That's going to be beginning the unit when you get into it with the students there. Now, as a teacher, you can go through that as well, and it would be encouraged that you go through that even before you go through it with your students to refresh those things in your mind. Most people that I've dealt with, they don't have a photographic memory, right? And we can read this information and we don't have it all in our minds. I mean, we have it there, but we can't instantly recall it. We don't have to. That's why we have the book to be able to go back and rehearse this whenever we need to draw off of any information. And you'll know when we go to, meetings and do presentations and so forth, as teachers, we're constantly, asking each other and picking each other's minds. Where was that in the character unit about such and such or this or that, or which book does it say this or that in there, right? We're asking the teachers, or sometimes we'll ask the students, do you remember where it says that in there? We're constantly drawing off of each other, and it's a great benefit when you have people who are focusing on the same goal. Gives you strength as well. It says, encourage students to become people of integrity by developing positive character or positive traits and eliminating negative traits from their character. All right. And of course, we covered that there in the character unit, about integrity. Teach each lesson with zeal and excitement. Now, as a teacher, you can't get up there and just fake it, right? Your students are going to know it, right? But don't get up there and, there was that one guy on Wonder Years, that science teacher who, he always talked like this. Today, students, we're going to learn about respect. Now, I'm very excited about this lesson. I hope you will be too. All right? All right, you're not going to get your students engaged in it. David covered some pointers in his lesson in showing different techniques of teaching, right, and different styles of learning for different students. Some students are great at hearing it. Some students are great at seeing it. Some students have to be engaged in it, right? And you know what? The Peaceful Solution has all those things incorporated in it, right? With the enrichment activities and the things that are in there to enhance the lessons for all different types of learners. All we have to do as teachers is go over the information and then present it in the class and give them an opportunity. Sometimes ask the students, to put in their ideas and how to go about practicing these enrichment activities. It gives them an opportunity to contribute and be a part of the lesson as well, even more so. So teach the lessons with zeal and excitement and use the enrichment activities to solidify the concepts of respect in the minds of your students. As students grasp and understand the importance of obtaining a positive moral character as taught by the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program, they will develop traits that will lead them into becoming true role models. All right? So you remember I told you to mark that role model there, and I want you to tie that back into what we covered here on page LP1A, or Lesson Plan 1, page A. And we looked at that third paragraph where it says, without appropriate role modeling of what respect is. So in other words, they need appropriate role modeling. What's a part of the goal of us as teachers being appropriate role model to our students? When you look on Lesson Plan 1, page B, right, you'll see here that as students grasp and understand the importance of obtaining a positive moral character, as taught by the Peaceful Solution, and as role modeled, you can put in there or say as role modeled by their teacher or by their parent or whoever else is learning these things, as these things are role modeled and practiced and demonstrated as a teacher, and you're in the classroom and you might have a troubled student who likes to act out. They say, negative attention is better than no attention at all. And some young people, that's kind of because of their environment that they live in at home. The only time that they get attention is when they're getting yelled at. In other words, nobody pays any attention to them. No one gives them any encouragement. No one says, hey, you're doing a great job, or just even asking, how was your day today, right? And so they don't get that kind of attention or that nourishment. They're not being shown that they're cared and that there's concern for them, that there's value for them. So they've learned that, when I do something wrong, then mom or dad pays attention to me, right? And so it kind of goes back into that that reward center of the mind, even though they're not associating it with, that being harmful to themselves or others. They're just saying that, hey, I get attention. So they do that in school or in the classroom as well. Well, when you as a teacher who are learning this lesson along with your students demonstrate or role model these concepts, these traits as well, now the other students who are in the classroom as well, even though they're not the ones who are engaged in the conflict, right? They're a part of it. They're seeing it. They're interacting with their eyes and their ears and their hearts. And as you put these things to practice and handle that in a positive, respectful way, you have set the example for them. So now you've given them at least one example of how they can handle disrespect if they encounter it, or when they encounter it, they surely will, throughout their day or their week or any time in their life. So when they see that example, then of course these things will lead them into becoming role models, because we're not just trying to teach young men and women about these concepts so they can just learn it on their own. We're teaching them these things so that they can practice them and to teach others as well. They might not know it initially, but they're actually learning to be teachers of the peaceful solution. We want them to not necessarily, the goal is not necessarily to get them up behind the podium teaching, but we want them to demonstrate these lessons through their everyday interactions, because it's the character that's being built. So if we build their character, then it no longer becomes something that is necessarily, like they have to rely on the book, although there's nothing wrong with going back to the book, but it's something that is a part of them. It becomes who they are, just like it becomes who we are. So we see here, therefore, it is our responsibility as teachers and educators to guide them into that direction, which will benefit not only themselves, but all their interactions. All right. So that's what kind of we got there as in the introduction to the unit, and some of the things that are going to be covered. Now let's look at lesson plan 1, page C. And we see here chapter 1, the value of respect. And this is the note to the teacher here, and this is the actual title of this chapter. It says, it is no longer shocking to hear about or witness our youth displaying disrespectful behavior. Verbal or physical abuse and defacing and destruction of property are common within our schools and neighborhoods. And I remember going to a school. I believe we were in Laredo there. We had to go to teach one of the schools down in Laredo, and it was a pretty big school. And I remember walking from the parking lot into the front door of the school, and I just remember the sidewalk was literally just dotted with thousands of pieces of gum. I mean, thousands of pieces of gum. And there was a maintenance guy that was out there with his pressure washer, and he was trying to pressure wash those pieces of gum off of there. And I'm thinking, okay, obviously the students can't have gum in school. So instead of being responsible and showing respect to their environment, their school, the property, and so forth, and disposing of it in a proper waste receptacle, what did they do? Spit it out on the ground, right? And it was just so many pieces of gum. At first, I thought it was a design in the concrete when I was walking up to the school, and I looked a little closer, and I was like, wow, this is a whole bunch of gum. I had a horrible experience one time when I went to pick up a desk and move it, and my fingers got stuck to the bottom of it because people take gum and they stuck it to the bottom of the desk, right? And they're not supposed to have it. They didn't have any place to throw it away, so they just stuck it to the bottom of the desk, right? But those are all forms of disrespect, right? When you do those types of things, that's a part of defacing property. It's a part of destruction of property because somebody's got to clean that up. Somebody paid for that property. Those desks, those chairs, those tables, that sidewalk actually belong to the school, right? Now, if you would have asked the school, is it okay if I spit my gum out on the ground? And they would have said yes, well, I guess it would be okay. But I highly doubt that they would give you permission to deface the property. Those things should be disposed of in a proper waste receptacle. But of course, when those things occur, that makes a lot more work for other people, because now instead of the, maintenance men or the janitorial crew taking care of other more important things, they're out there trying to clean up a whole bunch of gum because of students who aren't responsible. It was like the example I saw, the girls were all the time writing lipstick with their lipstick on the mirrors. I think I told you about that before. They were all the time going in between classes, and they go and do their makeup and their hair and things like that, and then they put lipstick on and write it on the mirrors. And the principal had gotten kind of tired of it, because the maintenance guy was coming and telling them, hey, these girls are still writing on the mirrors every day. I'm cleaning these things off. And so she gathered all the girls in the bathroom and said, listen, I don't know who's writing on the windows, but our maintenance man has to come out here and clean these things every day. This is what he has to do. And she had pointed to the maintenance man, and he went and he got the little scrubber brush, dipped it in the toilet, and then washed the wet mirror down, and it impressed in her mind, oh, my word, I'm putting that lipstick on there and then putting it on my lips. Needless to say, that stopped the lipstick on the mirrors. But when people do those types of things and destroy property, it makes a lot of work for others. Not only does it make work, money has to be spent to clean those things up. Pressure washers cost money, oil changes cost money, gasoline costs money, electricity costs money. And so these little types of forms of disrespect to property, they add up. Someone's got to pay the price for them. So it says here also, verbal or physical abuse and defacing and destruction of property are common within our schools and neighborhoods. How did disrespect for people and their possessions become so rampant in society? And so these questions are going to be answered as we move forward. How can we, as educators and role models, discuss these concerns with our students? Now, as these questions are presented, remember here, we're talking about the note to the teacher. So as these questions are presented, teachers, be thinking of how we can incorporate answers as we move forward in the lessons. This is where also some of the examples of the articles that we bring in, right? Some of the videos and so forth. It supports the lessons and also demonstrates, of course, with the use of the peaceful solution, how these things how they came about first and foremost, and how they're going to be fixed. Of course, education is always the key, but be thinking about this. These aren't just questions. This is a note to the teacher. So it's telling you as a teacher, be thinking about these questions so that you can answer them with your students as you move through the lesson. The sad fact is that many people perceive disrespectful behavior as normal in today's world. Students see nothing wrong with demonstrating their opposition to authority, ignoring instructions, or damaging the property of others, right? Even so much so that there's been a few instances where I've seen they've had walkouts, where the students will walk out and they'll protest because they don't like something, or they think something is unfair. Sometimes the parents are supportive of the students in these things, but if the school has rules and those rules don't violate anything that would bring harm to themselves, others, or the environment, those rules don't invite any or violate any principles or moral principles, just follow them, right? But sometimes students will do this. They'll walk out, they'll destroy property, they'll riot. That was always a big thing. And when fights would start out, it would either be during lunchtime or after school. And sometimes it would get so wild that people who had nothing to do with it, they would get hit with chairs and tables and trays. And, at the end of the whole conflict, I mean, there'd be food all over the place. People would be injured, tables would be broken, stuff would be all out of whack. Well, again, somebody has to deal with that. Someone has to clean that up. Someone has to pay for it. I don't know if you've ever seen the price of these things that are sold to schools. Tables, I don't know if you remember those folding lunch tables that had little circle stools on them, or the benches on them. Those things are extremely expensive. And when you look at an average size school of, I don't know what, 500,000 students or so, that's a lot of tables that they have to put in the lunchroom for the different mods who have lunch at various times. And when the students destroy those things, the school has to come out of their budget to pay for them. And then people get upset because, well, we can't do any other extracurricular activities. Well, they had to put that money for extracurricular activities and to the repairing of things that should have been taken care of if respect was shown. So left unattended. Now keep this in mind because none of our students should be left unattended, right? Their minds should not be left unattended. They should be constantly being fed with things that strengthen and keep them thinking and building their minds and their character. How can they apply what I've learned in the peaceful solution to this situation? How can I deal with this when I'm around these people who are, always talking about others or might be talking about me, right? But when a mind is left unattended, this attitude only leads to large-scale social problems. In other words, what we see taking place in the school with our youth, if that mindset isn't changed throughout their youth into adulthood, you're going to have that same mentality when they have to interact with society as adults. Disrespectful children become disrespectful adults if they're not trained in any other way, right? So that's why it says if left unattended, right? Left unattended, this attitude only leads to large-scale social problems and increasing numbers of juvenile delinquents. This chapter will enable students to have a greater understanding of how respect can improve the overall quality of life. Now, included in this chapter are discussions on basic fundamentals of respect, which must be applied to all life. And again, we're going to, these are what's going to be covered in this very first chapter here on the value of respect. Also, the importance of valuing and appreciating others and their property. Now, if you take into consideration that word valuing and appreciating and go all the way back to the acceptance unit, right? And what we covered in acceptance and appreciating other people for who they are as a person who has the ability to contribute to society. Now, that doesn't mean accepting negative character traits or immorality in the individual, but them as people. Anybody can unlearn a bad habit or a bad trait and learn the positive one if given the opportunity and if trained. But a lot of times you have to get over that barrier of them not having value for themselves, because people, sometimes they've been taught, they've been trained, they've been spoken. I think even David mentioned, someone told him, I wish you wasn't even born. That's a horrible thing to say to a person, right? But many young people hear those types of things on an everyday basis. So that lowers their value or their worth in their own mind. So they think, well, I can't do anything. I can't do anything to improve myself. So basically you have a block. So anything you try to teach them, it's kind of blocked because they've already set in their mind that there's no way, there's no help, there's no hope for me. Why even teach me this? Well, as a teacher, we kind of have to, the peaceful solution is a tool. So sometimes it's a little hammer and chisel. All right. Sometimes it's a big jackhammer, depending on the situation, depending on how we use the tool. But the ultimate goal is to help the student to see the value in themselves so that they will have the desire to apply these character traits consistently in their daily lives to become better people. Okay. And that's a challenge. And as teachers, we can't give up just because we don't see immediately that this person is grasping the lesson. Well, what did we learn at the very beginning? If you see that some things are lacking, go back and revisit the lesson again. Don't give up on the students. Don't give up on the children. They have minds. They're there. They're capable of learning. As teachers, we have to have value, see value in them enough to give them the information that will help them to become better people. And then lastly, we're going to see here how to avoid disrespect, how to avoid it, okay? And those are just some of the things that are going to be covered in this first lesson of the value of respect. And so when we get into the next class, which David is going to be teaching, he's going to be starting on lesson plan 1, page E, starting in with the lesson plan on the purpose of an objective as we move forward in this lesson. But keep all this information in mind, and it would be great. It would be handy to, if you can't bring your book with you, your character Don't expect you to walk around with 4 books all the time, but at least make sure you have a notebook where you could at least jot down some information, because there's excellent cross-referencing resources that you can draw off of these classes that you can write in your notes to tie back into character acceptance and self-control as we move forward. So let's see here. Our next class is going to be 12/18, and that's going to be at 5:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. And like I said before, David is going to be the teacher for that class. I do thank you all for attending, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and we look forward to seeing you at next class. Bye, everyone.